All right. All right, Sarah, whenever you're ready.
Welcome, everyone. It's good to see you. I'm Sarah Morgan. I am the director of the Art Museum of South Texas in Corpus Christi, and I'm also a board member for Texans for the Arts. And for those of you that are not fully aware of what Texans for the Arts is all about, they are a nonpartisan statewide arts advocacy organization that organizes advocacy efforts in order to protect and even hopefully more so increase public and private funding for the arts. They work at the state, the national, and the local levels, and they provide coordinated information about legislative activity as it relates to art issues. So I also want to introduce to you today, we have the Executive Director, Ann Graham, and the Associate Director, Chris Kiley, on the line with us. So these two brains never stop working, and they are continually advocating on behalf of the arts. So thank you, Ann and Chris, for all that you guys do. So Texans for the Arts is, as I explained, it's a group that is advocating on behalf of arts issues. I want to remind you guys, if you're not already a member of Texans for the Arts, I would encourage you to go onto their website. I'm going to put the link for becoming a member for Texans for the Arts into the chat. So you guys can click on that and go directly to that page. But membership really is the revenue source for this organization. And if you have ever received hot funds or a TCA grant, then you are definitely a beneficiary of their efforts on your behalf. So I'd encourage you, they have organization and individual membership options. So there's different levels, and I would definitely encourage you to check that out, please. I also wanted to let you kind of give you an update on something that they've been working on for several years and just came to public fruition last month, and that is their HOT toolkit. And I'll put this link also in the chat for you guys, but you can go to their HOT toolkit website, and it's going to give you all kinds of information about accessing HOT funds at the municipal level. And those HOT funds are currently the largest source of public funding for the arts in Texas. And once you kind of click your way through, you'll get to tabs that divide it up into arts organizations and artists, municipalities, and hotels. So you can click on whichever one of those is, pertains to your situation, and you'll have case studies, all kinds of information in there. So I would encourage you all to check out that HOT toolkit. Next, I wanted to introduce you to Shannon. And I just asked you how to pronounce her name, and now it's completely gone. Gangundi.
Gangundi, you got it.
I did not get it at all.
Close enough.
So she's going to give us an update on the legislative session. She has been involved in legislation for the last 20 years, and now she's working privately as consulting and actively involved in arts issues. And once you hear her speak about all that she's doing, we are so happy that she is working on our behalf. So Shannon, thank you for talking to us today.
Great, thank you. Well, I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the upcoming legislative session, which starting in January. Talk a little bit about the elections, talk about some of the major issues that I think are going to be addressed in the next legislative session, and then talk a little bit about Texan for the Arts legislative agenda and what we hope to accomplish. And so Ann, I know, has got a lot to say as well, so jump in anytime if I move on to a topic and there's more to say if something I missed. So the legislature meets every odd number year for 140 days. And so the next legislative session is starting January 12th. Of 2021. It will go until May the 31st of 2021, and then there'll be a 20-day kind of post-conclusion of the session period in which the governor can veto any legislation that was passed. And then in September of 2021, that's when most of the bills that are enacted will become effective. And then that's when the budget will start for the next fiscal year. And so, some of you may have heard there was an election recently, apparently still going on. But how that impacts Texas, I want to talk about how that's going to impact Texas. So there was a belief that, let me step back. Right now, the House of Representatives in Texas has a Republican majority. And the Republican majority going into the elections was 83 Republicans and 67 Democrats. And the belief was that the Republicans, the Democrats had a fairly decent shot of taking over the majority in the House, or at least getting the split to be very, very close to 75 on either side. That did not happen. In fact, the split seems to be almost exactly the same. It will likely be 83 Republicans to 67 Democrats post-election. One Democrat incumbent lost to a Republican, one Republican incumbent lost to a Democrat. So I heard somebody say it was basically like a hostage exchange. We got one, they got one, but everything stayed the same. And so there are a couple of seats that are likely going to be in a recount, maybe a runoff, but that's probably where we're going to end up. On the Senate side, it was, there's 31 members of the Texas Senate. It was 19 Republicans to 12 Democrats. And this election changed one seat. Pete Flores out of San Antonio was the incumbent Republican. He lost to a Democrat. And so now it's 18 Republicans to a 13 Democrat split. That is relevant. I won't go into too many details, but there are certain rules that have to be suspended in the Senate in order to bring up legislation. It used to be that you had to have 21 votes to bring up legislation. Dane Patrick, Lieutenant Governor, changed that. The senators changed that number to 19. And now that there's 18 Republicans, there's talk that that might get changed again. So that'll be something to watch. But the goal is to make the Senate be, bipartisan, or as bipartisan as possible on some of the legislative initiatives. So, but mostly it's the same. The Republicans have the majority in the House. The Republicans have the majority in the Senate. And they have the majority, all statewide officials, governor, lieutenant governor, comptroller, attorney general, all Republican. Something to note, next election, which is in 2 years, all of those statewide officials are up for re-election. So that'll play into the politics of next session. And every state senator will have to run again because of redistricting, which we'll talk in a minute. So a lot of politics will play into this next legislative session because so many people are going to be up for election in 2 years. Some of the major issues that are going to be taking place next session, the only legislation that the legislature has to pass every legislative session is the budget. So the budget will be a very hot topic. Because of COVID, we're not really sure what session is going to look like. Right now, I cannot go into the Capitol. You cannot go into the Capitol. Staff and members are allowed to come in. They're holding most hearings virtually. They haven't put out specific information on what's going to be allowed, what's not going to be allowed. So we're not really sure how we're going to be able to advocate and impact what's happening inside the legislature. But we do know they have to pass the budget regardless. And so, want to talk a little bit about when they left last session. They believed that the budget that they wrote for what's called the FY fiscal year 2021 budget, that they would have a surplus of about $3 billion at the end of the biennium. Well, the comptroller came out in July and he revised that estimate and said, okay, instead of having a $3 billion surplus, you're more likely going to have a $4.5 billion deficit. And the deficit is a result of both the economic impact of COVID, but also because of oil prices and some of the reductions that we've seen in production in oil and gas. The comptroller has stated since that July estimate that numbers aren't trending as bad as that last estimate predicted. So he might be able to, in January, come out with a new estimate with maybe $1 billion less shortfall, but that's still a $3.5 billion shortfall. So whichever way you slice it, this is going to potentially most likely be a very tight budget cycle next session. There are some unknowns around the budget. The Congress has passed some legislation in the past There was $6 billion that came into the state through a coronavirus relief fund. That money's also been at the local level, additional resources at the local level. So to be determined whether or not Congress comes in and passes an additional supplemental, or I'm sorry, an additional stimulus package for the state legislatures that are struggling. So still some unknowns, but overall we think it's going to be a tight legislative cycle. Redistricting, which I mentioned before, every 10 years the legislature is required to redraw the lines of the Senate and House districts in the state of Texas to reflect population growth or population decline, to try to make sure that every vote has equal weight so that your districts are aligned from a population perspective. That is up next session. We just had a census. We're waiting on some of those numbers. If the legislature is not able to pass a redistricting bill to redraw those lines, then a group called the Legislative Redistricting Board will step in and they will approve the lines. And that's the Lieutenant Governor, Speaker of the House, Attorney General, Comptroller, and the Land Commissioner. Just noteworthy, they're all Republicans. But if the legislature cannot pass a new redistricting bill, then it goes to that committee. Other issues that I think might be relevant next session, I think there's going to be potentially some health care legislation, response to COVID-19, potentially some equity, civil justice type legislation. But I think knowing that folks can't get into the building right now and that it's very hard to hold hearings, the consensus I think seems to be that we're not going to have a ton of legislation make it all the way through the process. It's going to be a very scaled down session, so to be determined. As far as the Texans for the Arts legislative agenda, because of what I just explained in terms of concerns with the tight budget cycle, we are really taking an approach to protect the accomplishments that we have made in past legislative sessions. So number one is really protecting the municipal hotel occupancy tax. I know Ann's going to talk a little bit about that in just a minute, but statutory changes, we want to make sure there's no statutory changes that authorize cities to levy this municipal hotel occupancy tax, and encourage municipalities to maximize the full 15% for the arts. And then also we were able last session to successfully increase the appropriations for the Texas Commission on the Arts. We were able to include $10 million for cultural district funding. And so we're working really hard to protect that funding to make sure it stays in the budget and is not reduced in any capacity. Same thing, there was some resources and it was $1 million that went in for the, no, I'm sorry, it was 250,000. I don't know where that million came. $250,000 were appropriated to Texas Commission on Arts for some arts in the military grants having to do with mental health and healing powers of the arts. So we're going to work to try to keep that intact as well. We have been working with Texas Commission on the Arts to request some resources from the CARES Act money that the state received. We were hoping to pull down, somewhere between $9 to $10 million to help grants for, arts entities that have been, what we claim, which we believe is disproportionately impacted by the shutdown. They were some of the first entities to shut down, some of the last to come online. So far, it seems like the bulk of the coronavirus relief fund has been spent on healthcare services and reimbursing expenses that the state has incurred, as opposed to creating new programs. But we're going to keep working on that initiative. The resources have to be encumbered currently based on congressional rule by the end of this calendar year. So unless Congress comes in and changes that, that's going to be the deadline that we're working up against. But we'll continue those efforts, working with the state and with the folks that are tasked with deciding how to spend those CARES Act funding. And I'm going to turn it over to you to see if there's anything else on the legislative agenda front that you want to add.
Thank you, Shannon, and thank you, Sarah, for the introduction, and welcome everybody to our regional conversation. I'll be pretty fast here, and then we can break out into questions. We'd love to know if you have any questions or concerns to raise and want to elicit conversation between you all as well. So building on what Shannon said, two primary arenas that we are working on in the legislative session, and it's protect and preserve what we've been able to achieve. First and foremost, the Texas Commission on the Arts and the Cultural District money. it's really been a benefit for us to have two primary sources of arts funding. The Texas Commission on the Arts being through the appropriation process, through the legislative sessions, through the up and down votes, and the hotel occupancy tax, which is a tax levied on people who spend the night in hotels. So it just helps us maybe weather the storm a little bit. Of course, this pandemic storm has thrown the hotel tax into great demise, and the hotel tax receipts have, depending on what county and what community you're in, has gone from as much as 92% to 58% decline in resources. So for those of you who receive hotel occupancy tax money from your communities, you know you've already been warned that the last quarter of receipts is way down. We're seeing a little bit of a start of travel again. It's going to be sort of dependent on vaccines, dependent on how we make it through the holidays, et cetera. But that's clearly going to be an issue, and we hope that that will be rebounding. About the TCA, and again, Sarah references that I hope many of you get TCA funding and are eligible for that. They have fundamental programs like Arts Create, which is their operation support funding. They have Arts Respond, which is their program specific money. And again, in the health one is where the arts and the military money was placed after the last session when we secured those resources. What's been unique about the cultural district program and has made that so special is it was founded in 2005 or as a legislative act, but it was 10 years before we were able to secure any money. In the first time in the 84 session, we were able to secure 10 million. It got vetoed to 5, but that put real money out into the cultural district program. A cultural district is a geographically defined area that has a robust sort of arts and culture climate. That has a museum, or it has theaters, has public art, has retail, has wine and beer and places to eat, has celebrations, has a density and a feel of artistic activity. It can spark historic restoration. It can help build community pride. It can serve as a tourism beacon. It can absolutely help with economic development. So there's a lot of reasons in your given community, and they range from the tiny towns of Canadian with population 2,000 up near Amarillo to there are now 6 cultural districts in the Houston area. And they range all over the state, from El Paso to Texarkana to Corpus. Here we are in Corpus. Here we are in Austin. Sarah is hosting us in Corpus, and McAllen, Texas. So it's really all over. And now there are 48 cultural districts with more applying. In fact, Laredo and Brownsville, also in the South, applied this last year and will be reapplying. Sometimes it can take 2 to 3 years to be able to get the designation. So it's just a really important program, and the sizes of the grants are substantive, and they can range between $10,000 and $200,000. So that is real money that is worth protecting to be able to enable communities to do really strong work. And it could be programmatic work. It could be capital expenses. It does have to have sort of a tourism bent, making the community a better place. But there's a lot that can be put under that. Here in the South region where we are, so there's our Rockport, San Antonio has 3 cultural districts, Corpus and McAllen, as I mentioned. So those are some that are here. In terms of the hotel occupancy tax, that was originally started, Chapter 351 of the Texas Tax Code, hottoolkit.com. Sarah put that up in the chat box, and Shannon referenced it. The arts were not originally part of the hotel tax. It was originally just a state tax, and then it became a municipal tax. And it wasn't until about 15 years after the original tax bill was enacted that the arts were added, and they were added because Attorney General and the legislature at the time in 1977 felt that corporations and businesses were not choosing Texas as a place to live and to work and to bring their corporate businesses because there wasn't a really rich arts and culture community. And they felt that that was really important for their businesses and their employees and to attract and retain employees. So they added the arts up to 15% of the municipal hotel tax, which is typically a 7-cent tax on every dollar. And up to 15% for the arts, it's optional. And ever since that's been enacted, the arts have been working to try to maximize that full 15%. It is the largest source, as Shannon mentioned, it's the largest, or Sarah, it's the largest source of public funding for the arts in the state. And if you go to hottoolkit.com and you go to the arts tool number 1, there's a whole tool on just like, well, how much money is collected? And does my community use any for the arts? And there's a graph and a spreadsheet in there that you can look up your community. It's required by law. We passed a bill 2 sessions ago where your municipalities are required to submit a report between January and February on how much hot's been collected and how it's been distributed over the 5 major uses, which are conventions, CVBs, the arts, what is it, the other two, CVBs and boy, I should know those off the top of my head. Anyway, those are reported. If you go onto that and you find that your city is not listed, it means that they have not reported it, and there are instructions in the tool in terms of how to encourage your municipality. And feel free to call up your city treasurer or your finance committee or your mayor and make sure that they report those so that you know how those resources are being invested. Before we go a little bit more in detail, we have a video. It's a 3-minute video, tells kind of how the hot toolkit works. So Chris, if I could call on you to do that, that'd be great. Thank you. Yes, so I hope that gave kind of a sense of the layout and how to use it, and want you to navigate it. And I'll give a shout out to some photographs on there from the art museum here, Sarah's museum, and I see Charlie Lockwood here with Texas Folklife, and there's a bunch of pictures in there. So all of the photographs are projects that have been funded by Hotel Tax, and they are all projects from our members. So glad to share that with you. That is also on our homepage, texansforthearts.com. That video lives there if you ever want to share it with your municipality or with your hotel leaders. So I'm going to be really brief in my final remarks here, and then we can open it up for questions. This is a radical decline where people who've gotten grants are now finding that their grants are reduced by 40 to 50%. These are often funds that have been sustaining arts organizations and communities and really important for tourism. What we're hoping, we wondered whether is it insensitive, is it the wrong time to bring this toolkit out in the middle of the pandemic when we actually now think it's a very useful tool, an important tool. We want when funds start to rebuild in hotel tax and people start to travel again, that you find that this toolkit is useful for you to meet with you hotel leaders and your municipal leaders and really have conversations about why funding the arts at the same time, along with CVBs and conventions and other things as they start to rebound, is just as important, and how the arts may be even more important in terms of sort of community health and community healing. And if you don't have anything going on in your community, what can a CVB promote, really? I mean, so we know that these things are all tied together and we all want them to be successful, but we hope that this tool becomes useful. Also, it's really meant to be a dynamic tool so that if you have a question that is not answered on the question and answer page, the FAQ, let us know. There's a submit form on the back. And the case studies have been case studies that we invited, and we will welcome more case studies that kind of highlight distinctive success stories and models and good role models of different types of hotel occupancy tax projects. So if you have a case study to share, let us know, and there's a good chance that it'll end up in the toolkit. So we just did a launch in October. We did a workshop last Tuesday. And the gentleman who spoke from the hotel industry actually said he learned something from our hotel page. So we want this to be something that is consistently growing. And I would just like to give a shout out to the Houston Endowment that really provided the grant that was enabled this to happen for us. So with that, I will stop my remarks here. And one of the points of these community and regional conversations is for you to get a chance to ask questions, to meet each other in your own regions, and to share, to share in the conversation and to weigh in. And so